Okay, good evening and welcome. Uh, Thank you so much for joining Lead Now's NDP Leadership Debate for People and the Planet. My name is Shanaz Gokul, and I'm the Executive Director here at Lead Now. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the lands that we're gathered on. Today, I'm calling in from Tekaronto, Toronto, which is covered by Treaty 13 and is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. If you don't know what lands you are on, we ask that you go to native-land.ca to learn about the territory you are on, and we appreciate the participants on this call are living on land that First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples have lived on and cared for since time immemorial. If this is your first time attending a Lead Now event, we are a national political and progressive advocacy organization fighting for a better Canada. We envision a society where the rights to justice, dignity, and a healthy environment are built and upheld by the democratic power of an engaged public. We decided to host this leadership debate tonight because we are all living in a new geopolitical world, disorder, fraught with chaos, uncertainty, and unprecedented existential threats related to climate inaction and rollbacks, economic and political coercion from a once friendly neighbor, and at a time of mass unaffordability. So, whether you are an NDP supporter or not, this is an opportunity for you to hear directly from the next leader of the NDP party. Today, we are joined by all of the leadership candidates, Rob Ashton, Tennille Johnston, Avi Lewis, Heather McPherson, and Tony McQuail. Thank you each so much for taking the time to join us today. I wish you each all the best for this debate. And this is the first time we've ever hosted a leadership debate, and it's requiring quite a lot of complex tech support from behind the scenes. So please bear with us for any bumpy moments. And finally, I am delighted to introduce our debate moderator, Desmond Cole. He is a journalist and an author based in Toronto. He is the senior journalist at The Breach and the author of the 2020 bestseller, The Skin We're In, A Year of Black Resistance and Power. And if you haven't picked up this book, I encourage you to do it and add it to your reading list. And now over to you, Desmond.
Good evening, Shanaz. Good evening to the candidates. Good evening to everyone watching. Thank you so much for this opportunity to lead now. I'm thrilled to be doing this with you all this evening. I've been watching the NDP leadership debates up until this point. We are hoping to do something a little bit different this evening. We've heard from all the candidates, we've heard much of their plans, and we've heard them jousting with each other. My hope for this evening is that we are going to be able to allow the candidates to speak directly to you in the audience today through me as the moderator, more so than through their debating with one another. And we've kind of formatted the debate to reflect that. I am going to try and stay out of the candidates' way as much as I can, except to try and help them stay on the topics and the questions that we have chosen for them this evening. So, just a few rules and housekeeping notes. The debate is going to be split into several sections. In lieu of an opening statement, we're actually going to ask a key question from each of the candidates. There's going to be 2 minute long short form questions where they will have an opportunity to respond. And we're also going to have what we're going to call a ping pong round with each of the candidate. These rounds are going to be interspersed throughout this evening's debate, where I am going to speak with the candidate one-on-one for about 4 minutes. Just a reminder to candidates, I will try to remind you of this again. Your clock for the ping pong round doesn't start until I finish asking you my first question. And then in lieu of a closing statement, we're going to have a 45-minute statement from the candidates kind of summing up their policy proposals. As moderator, I will determine when a rebuttal is necessary, and that will generally be when I hear one of the candidates naming or directly challenging another candidate. Candidates, I will try to give you about 30 seconds for a rebuttal if one is necessary. We will have a limited amount of them given our time constraints for the evening. And we scheduled this event to last for about 90 minutes this evening. It could go slightly later, but we're going to try and keep everyone to time. Candidates will have a timer visible to them, and we ask them to stop speaking when their time has expired, or they may be muted by Lead Now to ensure that everyone has enough time. The speaking order was determined randomly for the first round and then just cycles on a rotation thereafter. Finally, none of the candidates were allowed to see any of the questions. The questions were determined by myself in conjunction with the wonderful team at Leadnow. But the candidates were informed of the general topics that we are going to be taking on this evening. I think that that is more than enough for me at the outset. We are going to begin with our opening question for each of the candidates. They're each going to have a minute and a half to respond to this question. And the question is for the candidates, if you could fight for one piece of legislation that would be a hallmark of your legacy as a political leader, well, what policy would that be? And based on the draw that we have for this evening, the very first candidate to speak tonight is going to be Heather McPherson. Welcome.
Thank you, Desmond, and thank you for the question. I thought about, I've been thinking about this question an awful lot, and I think many of us on this call will agree that the first thing we need to do is fix our electoral system. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we have an electoral system that doesn't mean that Canadians vote for something they don't want because it's slightly less bad than what they do want. To end strategic voting so that we actually can have an electoral system that represents the people across this country, I think is key. But as a member of parliament, I'm also extraordinarily proud of some of the legislation I've brought forward. I brought forward a private member's bill to stop coal mining in the Rocky Mountains, to protect our Canadian pension plan. I've brought forward legislation that will help people that are living with ADHD. My son has ADHD. He came to Ottawa and tabled that piece of legislation with me. The idea that we can stop, having goods come from territories that are occupied. All these things are important. All of these things are things that New Democrats can believe in and need to be fighting for. And that happens when we elect more New Democrats. That happens when we win more elections. Of course, electoral reform is one of the ways that we do that. But until we have electoral reform, let's get more New Democrats in the House of Commons.
You kept wonderfully to time. Thank you so much, Heather. Next to speak on the question, Tony McQuail.
Well, I agree with Heather. I've been saying that first past the post has been a log jam or roadblock to our political progress ever since I got involved. And in fact, it's been a roadblock and logjam to ordinary people getting fair representation in Parliament since women and working men got the vote after the First World War. So in terms of creating a legacy, I think we have to develop a strategy and tactics to deal with it. And so what I've been calling for is developing a green progressive coalition that would see political parties like the NDP, like the Greens, perhaps the Bloc Québécois and other smaller parties in other parts of Canada work together to bring forward a green progressive platform long before an election, and then work together with groups like Leadnow, Greenpeace, Seniors for Climate Solutions, all the different groups whose problems are really connected and we can multi-solve if we had a government that was prepared to work for us, and put forward one progressive platform and one candidate each riding on that platform so that voters had a clear alternative to the Liberals and Conservatives. And I would be very proud of a legacy that saw that happen and then bring in proportional representation for Canada.
Thank you, Tony. The next to speak is Tenniel Johnston.
I don't think you can pick a more like morally challenging question, because everything goes through my head. I mean, if I'm gonna leave a legacy attached to a piece of legislation, I would want that piece of legislation to be something that has the broadest, biggest impact for the most vulnerable in our country. And if we had the opportunity to simply pen that, whether it's with proportional representation or not, I think it would be a guaranteed livable basic income. It's proven to lift so many people out of poverty, It's proven to lift children out of poverty, decrease our crime rates across the country, which disproportionately impact Indigenous people in Canada. So that's a really big one for me. I mean, closing the infrastructure gap is a very, very big one for me. But when I think broadly across Canada, JLBI really comes to mind. But also, what I thought about this question was that, do I want my legacy to be attached to a piece of legislation? And arguably, no. I want my legacy to be someone that showed up when maybe other people wouldn't, someone that listened when people felt like no one was listening, someone that put in the ground game to build a party and build us the biggest, strongest base we've ever had, so that we can go forward in a really strong way in the House of Commons and even at our provincial and territorial levels, at our municipal levels, like really bring in democracy throughout Canada. That ability to show up and listen, I would take more pride in that than necessarily being attached to a piece of legislation.
Thank you very much. Next to speak, Rob Ashton. Welcome.
Thanks, Aaron. So one law that would define my legacy would have to be a Good Jobs Guarantee Act. Because right now people are working 2 to 3 jobs just try to make ends meet, and they're still worrying about how to pay the bills. So what I'd propose would be something with fair pay, benefits, a pension, and of course dignity of life. You see, we need homes built, public transit expanded, we need ports, green industry, manufacturing, and of course our public services strengthened. So the Good Jobs Promise legislation would do 3 things. 1, tie every dollar of federal government invested to good Canadian jobs. 2, create direct employment in sectors we need, such as housing, transit, healthcare economy, and the climate infrastructure. And number 3, and this one's simple, is if a company wants public money, then there's going to be real conditions. They're going to tie those jobs or that money to jobs and job creation. You're going to take our money, you're going to keep the jobs here, you're not going to oversee the jobs. Decent wages, worker respect, everything tied to it. Because workers built this country, and it's time that we get our fair share back. You know, as a member of the working class and a proud leader of the party, it'd be a privilege to have my legacy being spoke about by millions of Canadians, saying that they had a good job, they raised their family with it, and the government had their back.
Thank you so much. And finally, to speak to this first question, Avi Lewis.
I would fight for framework legislation for a Canadian Green New Deal. The cost of living crisis is the #1 priority of our campaign and of a supermajority of Canadians. And at this great inflection point in our history, we need a society-wide mission that galvanizes all of us to make big changes in how our country works, a true nation-building project that would make everyday life more bearable for the 99% and project the values of the progressive majority in Canada on the international stage. Rather than investing $500 billion in a decade on weapons and war, as the Carney government has announced, we would attack the climate emergency at the speed and scale that the greatest threat to humanity demands. And while we're at it, all of the climate solutions that we need can slash emissions and household expenses at the same time. We can get our buildings, transportation, and energy production onto clean electricity rather than polluting fossil fuels. We can create 1 million unionized jobs in manufacturing, construction, universal public services, and the care economy. We can build a network of new crown corporations offering a public option for food, banking, housing, and telecoms. A Canadian Green New Deal is the mission moment we need. It could bring together all Canadians to fight for a more affordable economy and a safer future in one big, inspiring project. Actually, it might have to be like an omnibus bill, now I think of it.
Thank you so much to all of you. You're professionals at keeping the time at this point, I see. Now you've heard from all the candidates. Let's show you what a ping pong round is going to look like. I have a little bowl here. All the candidates' names are in here, and I'm going to draw. I found the most thematically appropriate construction colored paper I could find. My lights are on, so this looks a lot more yellow than orange, but I promise you guys, I found the right color. So I'm gonna just jumble these around. I have no idea what's who here, and we'll pick the first ping pong round of the evening. Oh, I taped them together too well. It's Heather. It's Heather.
Let's have it.
Heather McPherson, welcome back. Thank you so much. And I'll just flip to my section with you here. If you just give me one moment. Here we go. So, Heather, you have 4 minutes with me. I am going to start your time with that 4 minutes. As soon as I finish answering the first question, we'll have two questions to go through. I'll try to split the time fairly evenly between the two questions. The first is on immigration. Earlier this month, you sponsored a petition in Parliament to stop Canadian collaboration with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, in the United States, based on what you called its, quote, a serious, excuse me. I just got my pages mixed up, Heather. This is my fault, and we're going to hold your time while I figure this out. Excuse me.
More than happy to talk about ICE too. I can just jump in if that's easier for you, Desmond.
Well, I've got to ask the question first.
Okay.
Yes, I'll repeat the beginning of the question if you can forgive me for that. I apologize.
Of course.
Earlier this month, you sponsored a petition in Parliament to stop Canadian collaboration, with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, in the United States, based on its serious human rights violations, its separation of families, etc. At the same time, however, the Canada Border Services Agency in this country continues to hand people over to ICE when they fail to secure asylum claims in this country. Do you have a concern about continuing to hand people over to ICE, even as you ask businesses and other groups in Canada to stop collaborating with this group?
Thanks for that question, Desmond. Honestly, like the whole thing, I wrote to the Prime Minister actually earlier on this year, because not only are we our businesses involved, we have ICE in Canada. We have ICE offices in Canada. We have the American government murdering their own citizens in cold blood. We have our weapons being sold, our technology being sold to be used by ICE against American citizens. And let's be extraordinarily clear, that breaks Canadian law, that breaks international law. The federal government has an obligation to revoke those export permits. But when you talk about the immigration and the handing of people over, we have called for years for the Safe Third Country Agreement to be canceled. It is not safe to be sending people to the United States, and that agreement should be canceled, absolutely. I have huge concerns when I see people being handed over that are escaping violence, refugees that are escaping violence, being handed back into America where we know they will be put into detention centers. Detention centers, by the way, that use Canadian technology, that use Canadian companies. This is appalling. I mean, one of the things.
I'm sorry to cut you just because of time.
Sure,
let me ask a quick follow-up about that. What about CBSA's activities in our own country? CBSA engages in family separation in this country. CBSA,
of course they do,
has engaged in incidents that have resulted in the death of people that are in its custody. What do we do about that in this country?
Well, so first of all, when you talk about moving people to the United States, what you're talking about is that agreement we have with the United States, is the Safe Third Country Agreement. That should be canceled. It should have been canceled years ago. To be perfectly honest, it should have been canceled in the first Trump administration, if not before then. But also, we've got to have legislation. We've got to have tools and enforcement in this country to protect people from the abuses of power. And for me, we are seeing immigration be used as a way to target people, as a way for liberals and conservative governments to deflect away from their failures. Okay. Their failures.
Forgive me, just to move on with time, I want to ask you my second question in this round, and it has to do with climate change. You face some criticism as a new member of parliament over the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The NDP opposed the project, but you didn't. Would an NDP under your leadership oppose any new fossil fuel projects, or do you support a more nuanced position than that?
So for me, I think that we do not need to be investing in building in more infrastructure for oil and gas. I mean, frankly, what we need to be doing is investing in the futures economy. And I've said that multiple times. You can go to my website and see my policy on making sure that we are protecting jobs and we are protecting the climate. There are increasingly less jobs in the oil and gas sector. People in my province of Alberta want to work. They want to support their families. That means we need to invest in a futures-facing economy. That means we need to be investing massively in renewables. The MOU between Alberta and the federal government is appalling. You know, that should never have been signed. That does nothing to help the people of my province. That does nothing to help workers, but it also doesn't do anything whatsoever. It pits British Columbia against Alberta. It pits Indigenous people against non-Indigenous people. It's a terrible agreement. There is no policy that doesn't put workers at the center. I will agree that there is no way you can have a climate policy that doesn't have workers at the center. But frankly, we cannot be investing in backwards facing technologies that are benefiting corporations from other countries. Absolutely not.
I gave you a little extra time there because of my mistake. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thanks, Desmond.
That's what a ping pong round looks like, everybody. A little bit of exchange between moderator and candidate. Thank you so much, Heather. We're going to go back to our general questions now. We have a first general question for all 5 of the candidates. I'll give you the order in just a moment, but first let me read you the question. And it is as follows. Scientists have been clear. A livable climate requires a full fossil fuel phase out. What can the NDP do under a Carney government, under our current situation right now, to push for immediate climate action? And when it comes to this question, we're returning to our order of speakers, which is just going to be a rotation from where we began. And we will begin this section with Avi Lewis. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah. So the question is what we can do under the current parliament to decarbonize our entire economy.
Correct.
I mean, the reality is that there's not a whole lot we can do, especially if Carney manages to secure a majority with floor crossers, as he's on the verge of doing. And I think that's why the NDP has an opportunity to be the party that bridges between the inside and the outside, because in moments like this, when we have a prime minister who has thrown every piece of climate legislation overboard in a very short period of time, except for a vague commitment to at some point negotiate a new industrial carbon price. We need masses of people in the streets, and we need civil society and social movements to pitch in hard. We can amplify those demands inside the parliament. We can hold the government to account, point out day after day in committees, in question period, in every space in the parliament, what an abdication it is that the Carney government is going all in on fossil fuels and dragging us in the wrong direction, right when the economics of solar, as China is proving, have been utterly transformed. And the cheapest way to produce energy on Earth is to point a piece of glass at the sun. But until we have power in parliament, the power either to control the balance of power in a minority or win a majority government, which we all acknowledge is a couple of election cycles away, something as massive as changing the entire political conversation from all in on fossil fuels, which is where the conservatives and liberals are, to not just no more fossil fuel expansion, but decarbonizing the economy, is a U-turn that we have to make in this super tanker of a nation. And it's a longer job, Desmond. We can't do it in this current parliament, which is why we have to fight alongside unions and social movements to change the conversation.
Thanks very much. Because this was the #1 rated question for Lead Now audiences, there is going to be a follow-up for each of you on this, so stick around for that. Next is Heather McPherson in this round.
Thanks very much. Listen, for me, I think that we need to be realistic about what we're facing right now. I'm proud of some of the work that I've been able to do in Parliament. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to take on the CEO of Imperial Oil. The work that I've done to stop coal mining in the Rocky Mountains, the idea that stood with folks in Northern Alberta against releasing the tailings into the Athabasca Delta. The need for us to actually have a strong New Democratic Party at this moment in time is vital. We see what happens in the House of Commons when we're not there, when we're not present, when there's only 7 of us. And I'm so proud of my caucus that I work with, that our team. But without party status, without those questions, without that ability to hold the government accountable, we've got to be working with social movements. I think we've got to be working with people across the spectrum to push this government because, Avi was correct. Like this, Mark Carney has abdicated his responsibility to protect environmental rights since the minute he was elected. One of his first pieces of legislation was C5. C5 is a piece of legislation that takes away the rights of allows any minister to override legislation, basically so that it can target the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and our obligations under the Impact Assessment and Species at Risk Act. The reality is that you'll find we all agree on this question, that we are all there. The deal is we need to get more New Democrats in there because as proud as I am of what the 25 of us were able to achieve in the last parliament, we need more New Democrats so that we can actually hold this government accountable until we can actually become the government. And I'll end there for you, Desmond.
Thank you very much. I'll take all the extra time that I can get this evening. Next in the order for this question is Tony.
Okay. Well, you say, what can we do with the Carney government? As a farmer, I only like to spend so much time pissing into the wind. And quite honestly, there's not a lot you're going to do with these folks. Both the conservatives and the liberals have demonstrated an incredible economic arrogance coupled with a devastating ecological ignorance. I referred to their memorandum of understanding between Alberta and the federal government as a memorandum of misunderstanding, a misunderstanding of how the ecosystem works and the incredible damage we're doing it. But we're going to have to be there in Parliament. We're going to have to be the proposition, not just the opposition, but the alternative vision in Parliament. But far more importantly, is to work with our riding associations to rebuild that strength at the foundational base of the party and ensure that it's out talking with civil society, with the unions, with the Seniors for Climate Solutions, for the Seniors Against Genocide, because all these relationships are interconnected. The fossil fuel industry is part of the war industry on this planet and the kind of violence that we're seeing in so many places. So we have to build that ground-based coalition. And if possible, yes, get in the street and prod the ignorant, arrogant folks who are trying to keep us on this dead-end path to move. But more importantly, build that ground-based coalition across society and across health, education, seniors, the whole gamut, to build a coalition that will work for that green progressive alternative that will help us move and win government to make the move to a green progressive transition to an economy that works for the planet and the people. When I first got involved in 1980, I thought we could do a better job for the planet and for the people, and I still think that's my goal.
Think you very much, Tony. Tennille, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, inside the house is challenging. I think I've been very firm in my calling that our power is outside of the House of Commons right now. Our power is in the people that can be loud and stormy on the outside of those walls, so that we're supporting some
I don't know if others are having this issue. Oh, yeah.
impact.
Sorry.
We should be running progressives
Tennille,
in municipal
please
and
forgive
regional
me.
district elections.
We just lost your audio there for a minute. I'm going to give you about 15 more seconds. Just pick up a sentence or two before you left where you left off. My apologies.
No worries. Can you guys hear me now? Is that
Yes.
good?
Yes.
Rural living, man. It's tough. Yeah, I was offering that we should be running progressives in municipal and regional district elections. If we want to have impact on carbon, we can do that from various levels of government. It doesn't have to be impacted from the top down. we can work very well from the bottom up and we can be agile outside of the House of Commons. We need to get education out there. We need to share what people can do either in their own individual lives on how to reduce their carbon. We need to be very clear on some of the steps that Carney has taken that is just, working further to destroy our planet. A lot of people don't necessarily hear everything that's coming out of the House of Commons, especially right now. There's so much disinformation out there. It is overwhelming. There are so many horrific things that are happening around the world that it is very easy to get distracted by atrocities in our political system. But our power is outside of those walls. Our power is in the grassroots, being loud, making sure we're gathering our people together and running progressives at all levels of government because we can really impact carbon footprint from a municipal and regional district level.
Thanks so much, Tennille. Sorry about the technical issue there. And Rob, you're last in this section. Go right ahead.
You bet. Thanks. So we have to highlight the fact that British Columbia is burning for 4 months of the year and the fire season gets longer, seems like every year. Quebec's suffering through floods and now tornadoes. Not too long ago, Fort Mac almost burnt off the map. And that's happening everywhere across this country right now. And so I say this all the time, but climate is a big part of the class war. Because big polluters supported by the ruling class governments that we have in power, they walk away with nothing but cash in their pockets. But who pays the price? It's working class families that do, that are left to clean up. And so to fix climate action, or to start fixing climate action, we need to do three big things: cut pollution, lower costs for families, and create good union jobs while we're doing it. And to win this war, we have to be united and not divided, because division is the weapon of the ruling class and the weapon of the boss. So to win it, we need workers to be brought along with it. Real climate action means changing the rules, ending fossil fuel subsidies, investing in union jobs that can't be outsourced, and guaranteeing full wage protection for workers that are in a transition at their job site. It means building an east-west energy grid, high-speed rail across the country where it can be built, and Canadian-made electric vehicles. It means training young people through a youth climate corps and making sure unions have a seat at the table in all discussions. Because this is truly a generational fight. We've all been talking about it for a few months now. So my approach is simple: climate action that puts workers first and builds a future we can actually live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me pick up on something that you've just mentioned, Rob. I think everybody seems to be in consensus that real meaningful change is not going to happen under the current government. And that's fine for everybody to say. But when we talk about the climate catastrophe that is in front of us, wildfire smoke from this country crossed the Atlantic Ocean into Europe last summer, during the wildfire season. I am saying this to outline the enormity of the task in front of you all and in front of the broader climate movement to wake people up if the things like that wildfire smoke crossing an ocean is not doing it. So 60 more seconds, starting with Avi once again, we'll go in the same order, about the challenge of waking people up to a climate emergency that they are essentially living amidst every day.
Yeah, thank you for refocusing it, Desmond. And the urgency has never been more painful and more pointed in our lives. The climate emergency is sitting in our lungs every summer, every smoke season, what we used to call summer. And, this is why, with Carney abandoning climate entirely, still a supermajority of Canadians, 2/3 of Canadians favor clean energy over fossil fuels, 85% want to maintain or increase federal climate action. This is still an incredibly popular policy. Even in Alberta, 72% of Albertans want to increase or at least maintain climate action. This is a time when the NDP can pick up the mantle of climate leadership that Carney has thrown on the ground from inheriting a very weak and tattered mantle from Justin Trudeau, who, like in many things, was largely performative on climate, and actually seize it in collaboration with social movements and lead on the urgency and the opportunity, connect it to the cost of living crisis, as I did in my intro, and show how we can slash emissions and people's expenses at the same time.
Thank you. Heather, you're next.
Thanks. Listen, we're New Democrats. We don't stop doing things because it's hard. You know, Avi said even in Alberta, but I would say especially in Alberta, you know, we need to invest in renewables. We need to be doing this. And I think we need to frame it. I think we need to frame it in a way where it is not one or the other. You have a job or you have a climate. And that's been a challenge that we've had. You know, we've got to talk about the opportunity. What massive investment in renewable energy could do for my province, could do for the workers in Alberta across this country. You know, the solutions are there and we can do it. It's hard. And standing up in the House of Commons and pushing on that is necessary. You know, I will say that we require a federal government that is putting in legislation, that is doing the work. And it will not do that without a stronger New Democratic Party. But listen, like the idea is that there is solutions there. We can build it there. We need to stop looking at it as one side or the other.
Thank you very much. We're going next to Tony on this.
Thank you, Desmond. We have to prioritize our time, and that's why I said I don't see spending a lot of time trying to change Mark Carney. But we do have to work together to build the momentum and to put forward the alternatives and to help communities get to work on what they can do without the kind of federal government support that we could make possible if we were in government. And so, you know, these are interconnected problems. And there's a concept called multi-solving that talks about how you build coalitions. So, you know, if you're concerned about climate, get together with people who are concerned about asthma, get together with people who are concerned about health, get together with people who are concerned about the cost of living, because the movement to a transition to a green economy is also something that will be far more affordable and cost effective than our current capitalist corporate treadmill that we're on.
As I throw to you, Neil, and also for Rob, some issue has been made during this campaign about the fact that the provinces may want different things from the federal government when it comes to climate change, that some of the provinces may want to pursue fossil fuel development, even if the federal party does not. And I'm talking also about NDP-led provinces. Any thoughts on the challenge there, Neil?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge for sure. I don't think it's a challenge that we don't have conversation about. I don't think it's a challenge that we leave certain groups or parties out of that conversation, specifically talking about First Nations and our Inuit and our Métis nations across the country. We need to involve people at all levels. And I was going to offer that's another layer of government that we should be working with. So in the meantime, while we're building our base, while we're gathering our movement, while we're getting things going, we can work with all different levels of government to bring forward renewable projects. A nation locally here, the We Will Come First Nation, is investing in a wind farm. Amazing. How can we make sure we're knowledgeable about what can happen at different levels and how are we actioning that? How are we growing our base through our student movement? What pressure can the students put on to bring forward climate change efforts? Where can we leverage intermunicipal and regional districts and elect progressive councils that can change these situations for us at a local level?
Thank you, Neil. And Rob, I'll go to you also on this idea of working with the provinces and some of the challenges that have been raised in this campaign.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So I'm going to echo what Neil said with Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities have to be on side. Look at partial ownership of projects if they're giving their free, prior, and informed consent. The communities in the area have to be on side with it. Because at the end of the day, the people driving these projects are driving the climate war that we're in. The fires, the floods, and the heat waves aren't workers, they're CEOs and shareholders that are chasing nothing but profits. And we always have to remember what happened in the past and what currently happens is these CEOs don't care if they make you sick, burn down your town, or maybe your town disappears tomorrow, as long as they cash out today. You know, working people are the ones that pay the price. We've seen it with poisoned water, asbestos miners working, dying in heat waves. And there's no climate action without workers. So if we're going to put these new projects on, we do have to have wholesome conversations with the communities, with the provincial party and the federal parties.
Thank you very much, Rob. That concludes this first round of general questioning. We're going to move on to our second ping pong round. I've got the bowl. I've got a card. I obviously taped these up far too well to this evening. I was getting very excited. And so I'm destroying everyone's name, which is like a horrible thing to do when you open it. Tennille, you're next. Welcome. So once again, Tennille, your questions will start after your time will start after I read your first question. Just give me one moment here. Thank you. Um, Here we go. Tennille, my first question for you is about artificial intelligence. In your platform, you propose the banning of AI-driven layoffs in certain circumstances by corporations. While the challenges that AI presents in the labor market are very real, this proposed ban seems somewhat heavy-handed. Why should the government penalize companies based on the kinds of technology that they use?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd say it as broad as the kind of technology that they use, because there's lots of technology out there that doesn't involve laying off potentially hundreds of thousands of people across the country just to automate something because it's going to make the CEO more money. AI poses a huge risk. It's incredibly insulting, honestly, that we're looking at allowing AI data centers to be built when we don't even have potable drinking water to all of our nations across the country. So we're willing to pump water to keep an AI data center cool, but we're not willing to invest in drinkable water for all Canadians. I think it's atrocious that we're allowing AI to move at the speed that it's moving when we have other pieces that we really need to bring forward to create equity across this country.
I hear
It's
you.
it's mind-blowing.
If I can just cut in, I hear you on that. But I think of automations like the auto tellers at the grocery store, something that a lot of people really don't like and resist. But I think like there's a gap between saying you can't do it and we're not happy that it's being done. Do you feel like even though AI presents a threat, that this is a fair use of government power?
I do. I think we need a huge pause in our current circumstance so that we can evaluate the actual impact that this is going to have, because no one's even monitoring it. No one's even watching it. It's just being set free. And I remember actually having a conversation at the market on Yates, which is a very fancy local market in Victoria, when they started to put in some of those automated telling systems. And I told them, I was like, I refuse to go through there because I want you to have your job. And it was just so like hard for that person to just kind of hear that, and but then also heartwarming at the same time, because they know that there's some people out there that really do care. And you're seeing these things go up in mass in Walmarts.
Okay.
So they're putting in a bajillion tellers, and then now 6 people are out of work because they've chosen to automate you walking through with your groceries. Like
Yeah,
that's
I'm gonna
yeah.
just move us on. Thank you for that. The next question is on election preparedness. Many in the party say that last year's election loss was mainly because of the fear of US President Donald Trump, who pushed voters towards the Liberals. Of course, it's very possible that we could have another federal election in Canada while Donald Trump is still in office. So, how might the NDP overcome this dynamic the second time around?
Yeah, so we need education out there. We should have been moving education out to our ridings to say, hey, that was a big one, and this is how your votes landed. People that voted based on fear, wanting to elect liberals that just ended up electing conservatives because liberals don't win in their ridings, like mine, need to know that that's how their vote landed. There was so much fear. I was getting text messages from people who truly knew who I was, and that and wanted to reaffirm that like I wasn't lying, that like I am the only candidate that's going to beat the conservative in North Island Powell River. And to get those messages from folks that are, confident voters, still riddled with that much fear that they were going to enable Polyev to run our country, was astounding. But we did not have the educational material out there to fight it. We weren't out there early enough with how politics show up in different ridings across the country,
Yeah,
and it
and
was a huge disservice to
I
us.
mean, what do you think that's about? Because we've always known about this idea of strategic voting. Why isn't the party more attuned to that? in your
I don't
view?
know, man. I'm new. I don't know why that education didn't come out sooner. It was something that, we tried to get out there as fast and as vigorously as we could, but we could only handle knocking on so many doors. And in the end, we weren't able to chase it down in my riding. We still finished really strong, highest non-incumbent in the country, but we need to get that education out and on all platforms.
That's time. Thank you very much, Tennille. I appreciate that. That's the second ping pong round. We're going to go back to a general question now for all of the candidates. This is our second general question for all of you. It's on housing, another extremely important issue to the Lead Now audience. Given the complete unaffordability of housing for so many people in this country, what steps would you take to ensure that everyone has an adequate home? And specifically, how would you prioritize those most impacted by the housing crisis and center actual affordability for renters and for people experiencing homelessness? The first person to speak on this is going to be Tennille.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I mean, we need to partner with the organizations that already support not-for-profit housing across the country. Locally, one that comes to mind for us is Macola Housing. Macola Housing has years and years of lists of folks waiting for housing, and these are our most vulnerable people in British Columbia that are waiting for housing. So we need to partner with those organizations to look at building housing in geographical locations where they can have benefit to working down on those lists and making sure we're getting those people housed. We also need to be mindful about the type of housing we're building. So, I mean, we have varying climates across the country. We need to make sure that these buildings are insulated super well. They should be coming with heat pumps just naturally already installed. We should be making sure we're taking advantage of solar wherever possible. And we need to make sure that we're not just building two-bedroom apartment buildings across the country. We need to make sure that these spaces can accommodate, a single dad and his 6 kids. Because that's a reality for a lot of people across the country. There are single parents that have numerous children that need a great place to be able to call home, not just a two-bedroom that they've tossed 3 bunk beds in that they're going to survive in until maybe one day they might be able to afford something bigger that's more comfortable for their family. We need to make sure that they're accessible to all types of physical abilities and disabilities, making sure the doorways are extra wide, that there's elevators or ramps, that the countertops are lower, that the light switches are lower. We need to make sure that housing is accessible to all Canadians and not just a minority of Canadians that maybe fit into these generically built apartment buildings across Canada. So it's not just about building doors, it's about the size of those doors and what size of families and people can live within them.
Thank you, Tennille. It's over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Ed. So I tell the story every chance I get. It's about my kid and her friends, and me chatting with them one night. And the question that I asked them was, did they ever think that they could ever afford to own a home? And the answer across the board was never. And it's not just them, it's people across the country, young people, people of various ages. And it's nobody's fault but the way the system's built. And the system's built by the ruling class for the ruling class. And all these pretend homes that liberals and conservatives say they're building, they're built by their developer friends for profit. And so what we have to do is we have to build homes like we did after World War II, en masse. We've got to crack down on corporate landlords. We got to control rent control. We got to put rent controls in. We have to end rent evictions. And so here's what I do differently: is I would build at a scale we haven't seen in decades. Not just not luxury condos, not investor units, real homes, public housing, co-ops, non-market, built by Canadians for Canadians. And then we would have to take on housing speculators, so that homes shouldn't be dealt like casino chips, where people are buying in and then hoping they're going to double or triple their money. And every federal dollar that comes to this has to have strings attached. And when I say that, it's public money building housing, and it's going to build affordable homes and create good union jobs. And we can't cut our way out of this crisis. We can't incentivize our way out of this either. So we need the governments to step up and lead. And how do we prioritize who gets the homes? Those would be conversations between our party when we're leading the government, provincial and municipal governments, and as well as, like Tennille said, social groups that know the areas and where the housing is going to be built. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Next to speak on this is Avi.
So what was it? It was Thursday. I was in Whitehorse, and it was cold in Whitehorse. Even people from there were telling me it. And I was touring a community land trust project, which is, I think, unique in the country. There are only one or two. It was a non-market housing project to create a small number, 32 single-family condos. They were like two-bedroom, one-bedroom units, and they were geared to income, but allow people to actually buy them. You can't sell them. They were like way below market rate, like $130,000 for a one or two bedroom unit that people of a certain income could buy. And you can't sell them for more than what you bought them for plus inflation over time. So they're going to stay affordable in the community and actually allow people to enter the ownership market. Now, we have in our housing plan a national rent cap. We have all kinds of policies that are about actually controlling the market, because the biggest problem in housing, of course, has become a financialized and a financial investment rather than a place for people to live. Attacking the problem of real estate investment trusts, these huge corporate funds that buy housing and profit from them, use algorithms and AI to boost and fix rents across multiple buildings and cityscapes. But that little project in Whitehorse was a bunch of people in the community actually figuring out how to have a non-market solution. And to me, it struck me as like a lit up path to a world where we actually don't ask the market to solve a problem the market has created and look outside the market. And then, of course, if I had more time, I'd talk more about how housing has to be tailored to the communities that are most vulnerable. And that means the communities have to be involved in designing the kind of housing that addresses their particular needs.
Thank you so much. Heather is next.
Thanks, Desmond. Listen, we have a national housing crisis in this country. There is no doubt in my mind. I have spoken to people who tell me about the fact that we have more seniors that have never been unhoused, that are unhoused right now. That's the fastest growing population. That 14, 15, and 16-year-olds are unhoused at increasingly growing rates. These are children. During the last election, I knocked on doors in my community, and I ended up knocking on these doors at a place with affordable housing. And as I was knocking, there was somebody going around putting up notices on the doors that was telling folks that their rent was increasing by like $500 or $1,000 each month. And I spoke to a mom whose daughter was going to school that day across the street. And she was crying because she knew she was going to have to tell her child that they had to move, that they couldn't stay in their home, that she couldn't go to that school. And that was some of the only, low-cost housing in my riding. So the fact of the matter is, we are not dealing with this crisis in a way that is just, in a way that is fair. We need to be getting corporations out of housing. We need to stop REITs. We need to ensure that the federal government is playing a role in building more nonprofit and co-op housing across this country. We need to have Indigenous-led Indigenous housing strategies across this country. We need to protect renters. You can tie strings to the federal transfers to provinces to ensure that there is rent control and renters protections within provincial legislation. And ultimately, we also need housing, supportive housing, for those that are unhoused right now. It costs money. If you have no heart in your body, it costs us money to keep people unhoused. The deal is, we need to put people in housing for everyone, housing first.
Thank you very much. And Tony, we'll go over to you.
Okay, well, 2 nights ago, our local NDP riding association participated in the coldest night of the year walk here in Huron-Bruce. And this is a place where people in communities across Canada are trying to address a problem that is being terribly ignored by too many federal and provincial governments. And what we have to be looking at is how to work with groups that are already working on this, like the Working Center in Kitchener-Waterloo, local housing cooperatives, Habitat for Humanity, and get their ideas of what would be a non-market, non-profit driven approach to solving this problem. Because what we have let the basic need of shelter become a speculative investment process. And that is just creating a market that doesn't work. And as Abby said, when the market's created this situation, you don't try and let it solve it. So certainly we need to have investment in that, but we need to be working at the local level as well, because it's critical that housing be in the context in which it's taking place. One size, one type is not going to solve the problem or fit all. And I know, we built our own house in the mid 70s, a passive solar home with wood as the backup. If you do housing right, it addresses the affordability crisis rather than becoming part of the affordability crisis. And that's why it's so critical that we both have federal and provincial and municipal programs that are investing in affordable local housing that's designed for the climate and the communities that they're going into, with a diversity and also a rent to own approach, so that people have an investment that is theirs and that is valued for a home.
That is time. Thank you so much to all of you on this question. It's time for another ping pong round. There are 3 names left in the magic bowl. The next one to be chosen is Rob. Hi, Rob.
How's it going?
I'm well, thank you. Less nervous than I was at the beginning of this. I've got 2 questions for you, and your time will start after I finish reading the first one. The first question for you is on immigration. You have said that you want to support migrant workers by giving them a, quote, clean path to permanency. However, the consensus among migrant rights groups seems to be that status upon arrival for workers entering Canada and naturalization for those already here is what's necessary. Do you support these measures of status for workers upon arrival and naturalization, regularization for those already here?
So I'm going to say yes. So my mom's an immigrant to Canada. She come from Ireland as a young person, as a child. My plan is to do away with the temporary foreign worker program as it is now, because the way it's written now is, I hate to say it, but modern day slavery. You have workers that can't argue back with their bosses. You have workers that are paid a less wage than most other people, if not everybody, and they can't argue about it. And so, we have to build a program to bring workers to this country and have them have the same rights as Canadians. And we have to find that path. We're going to create a program that allows people to become Canadian citizens or become permanent residents in this country and have the same rights under the labor code that every other worker does, so that the ruling class can't pin us against each other.
Excuse me for interrupting. For those who are already here under the current temporary foreign worker program, will you ensure that they, in fact, get a path to citizenship after coming here and putting in the work that they have?
100% they would have to be, because they've been basically lied to by employers in the current government system that we have, because they have no rights right now under the temporary foreign worker program. And so these workers have come here, done a good job in Canada, represented themselves well in this country. And so for sure, they're not just going to be brushed away and sent away. That's not the Canadian way. Not
I
at all.
appreciate that. Let's move on to the second question I have for you, which is about foreign affairs. The Liberal government has rejected calls in this country for a 2-way arms embargo on Israel. Even the restriction of new export permits has not completely stopped the flow of weapons from Canada to Israel, as it commits what many of us believe is a genocide in front of our eyes over the last 2 years. Do you support a 2-way arms embargo with Israel? And if so, how would you advocate for it?
100% yes. You see, if we're government, or when we're government, it's easier. But unfortunately, time is not on our hands. And so when I'm leader on March 29th, we have to use every power in every tool in our toolbox to actually make it happen. You see, Canada is at its strongest when we defend international law, when we defend justice for people, and we fight for dignities, not just for Canadians, but people around the world. And putting an arms embargo in for arms that were, whether it's straight to Israel or through the United States to Israel, it has to stop, because our nation should not be a part of any type of abuse, whether it's in Gaza or Iran, or pick any of the other slaughters that are currently happening around the world that the Canadian government, as a ruling class government, chooses to ignore.
And you can say that comfortably, even though there are what some people would classify as good paying, good union jobs that are being that are existing in order to make these weapons that are sent overseas for manufacture here.
So we still create armaments that we trade with our allies. We still have to create armaments that put our military personnel into a safe position. I don't believe that there'll be job losses in this. I think we'll be able to utilize the arms or the production facilities to create equipment that protects our soldiers.
That is time. Rob, thank you very much for that. We're going to return back to the general with all 5 of the candidates once again for our third, I think it's our third question. I'm having so much fun that I'm losing track of time. It's actually our fourth, I think. Someone's going to correct me if I'm wrong. The next question I want to ask all of you is a question about global geopolitics. Prime Minister Mark Carney is using Donald Trump's aggression as an excuse to massively expand military spending and domestic weapons manufacturing, purportedly as a way to support Canada's political independence and economic growth. What is your vision for Canada's armed forces? Tony is the first one to speak to this.
Canada's armed forces are already too integrated into the United States military industrial complex and system. It is not going to be an effective defense no matter how much money we were to put into Canadian military. We should focus the Canadian military on looking after Arctic sovereignty and our waters, and we should be focusing on international law. But if we're talking about Canadian defense, we need to give up any idea of a military defense against the United States. They spend more than the next 7 highest spending military countries on weapons, armaments, and war. I do not want the towns and villages in Huron, Bruce, or the cities across our country to look like Gaza or Ukraine. We will be far more effective if we choose to develop a nonviolent citizens defense strategy, which helps train the people of our communities and how to nonviolently resist aggression. We are also in an excellent position because we have been neighbors with the US. We speak the same language. We can fraternize with any soldiers they send and help them learn about how a healthcare system could actually be publicly run and not bankrupt people when they need healthcare, to help them understand how their country could be different. We also should be working with and supporting those in the US who are not pursuing the insane behavior of Donald Trump. But a nonviolent defense strategy, and there are groups like the Canadian Coalition for Nonviolent Defense, scientists for Nonviolent Defense, there are many things going on, and there's a course right now on unarmed civilian defense, which our campaign is helping riding associations learn about.
Thank you very much, Tony. Tennille, you're next in this section.
Yeah, I mean, I think Canadians really want to see us own our humanitarian aid. I think that's something that Canadians have always been really proud of, is being that humanitarian support across the world. I would love to see us have a little bit more diversification within our military. Watching Pimichikiak go like a week without any support from our federal government and have thousands of Indigenous people evacuated from their community is horrific. There's no reason why we can't have solid military supports and responses to a number of our environmental crises across the country. I mean, we have lots of opportunity to train military forces in wildfire, in various forms of evacuation. And I would love to see us diversify our troops so that we can meet our emergency needs within our borders in a much better way. We are arguably not nearly as supported in those different areas, especially in fighting wildfires within our country. We struggle all the time. And, we see the good-hearted folks coming up from New Zealand to come and help us out with our wildfires. And then we reciprocate when needed. And those relationships are beautiful. But at the same time, we could be creating really solid Canadian jobs, not only in fighting when the crises strike, but also in some of the preventative measures that we could be investing in. Some of the different tree planting investments we could make to protect our watersheds to help reduce wildfire spread. I think it'd be an amazing opportunity for us to grow our armed forces into some of these other humanitarian aspects of the work that we could be doing as the federal government.
Thank you. Rob, you're next.
Thanks, Desmond. So there was a time, once upon a time, when Canada played a serious role in the world stage, right? At a time where we were known for peacekeeping, diplomacy, and standing up for international law. We brokered agreements, we earned respect, but then something changed, right? Ruling class governments like Liberals and Conservatives have reduced our nation to tag along behind the United States, nodding our heads when they nod theirs, and walking the same walk that they're doing. We've been staying silent when it's politically convenient. And being independent doesn't mean being anti-American. It means being pro-Canadian values. It means we make decisions on what's right and not what's convenient in Washington. So when I'm leader, we're going to change this, because Canada should have an independent voice for peace and justice around the world. That means rebuilding and properly investing in peacekeeping and diplomacy like we used to do a long time ago. We should be known again for preventing conflicts, supporting ceasefires, strengthening the UN, and helping stabilizing regions before we get crises that just explode like what's happening around the world today. It also means standing firmly for human rights and international law, consistently. Not picking and choosing based on our trade deals, or not going quiet when our allies break the rules. Not using human rights as slogans against our enemies and ignoring the violations by our friends. If we believe in international law, and we do, then we have to defend it everywhere. And I know what country that I want us to be, and I'm ready to fight like hell to bring that back.
Okay, that's time. Thank you. Avi, you're next.
Thank you. And I love to hear my colleagues speak passionately about Canada being a force for peace on the world stage, especially in this moment with this unbelievable attack on Iran and the war that's been started in a horrible, unjustified way that Carney was so happy to support right out the gate. We need to talk about more about that, but we're talking about the vision for the armed forces now. I'm not against having an army. We need one. And we should start with actual adequate housing, better pay, and modern equipment for CAF members and their families. It is a scary time in the world. It's a terrifying world out there, and Canadians are really scared. But Carney's proposing a massive change to our society, taking us to 5% of our GDP on weapons and war. And we haven't had a debate. People didn't vote for this. We don't even have a plan or a vision from the Prime Minister when we have a defense industrial strategy that he launched about 10 days ago that proposes $500 billion in the next decade and massively increasing arms sales. This is not what people voted for. So we need to have an actual conversation in this country about whether we want to be massively increasing arms trading in the world where most of the wars are being promoted by bad actors. And most of the countries that we would consider to be more aligned with are boosting up their own military and not going to be buying arms from Canada. We do need more bombers. We need water bombers. We need a dedicated national force built into the Canadian Armed Forces for responding to climate disasters. That is an enemy that is burning down towns, that is burning our land, that is flooding our agricultural land right now. When it comes to something like Arctic sovereignty, I follow the lead of Laurie Idlout, our wonderful MP in Nunavut, who says that we can't have Arctic sovereignty when people don't have housing and adequate health care in northern communities. So you can't build military bases to solve social problems. We have to think about security for everyone in all of its
That's
aspects.
time. Thank you. And finally, Heather, on this question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to start by also acknowledging like the moment in time we're in. I think all of us are feeling the weight of what we are seeing as we see the increased militarization, as we see Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, start a war in the Middle East that will spread. Because I think as New Democrats, we all understand this hurts civilians, this hurts people. The people that pay the price for this violence are not the people that start this violence. So when Mark Carney said that he was willing to spend 5% on defense spending, I can't support that. I can't support a defense spend at the same time that he cuts $2.7 billion for international development. At the same time that Canada is not showing up on the world stage for diplomacy, for peacekeeping, for peace building. We are absent in all of those places. Right now, Mark Carney is in India. He is negotiating a trade deal with a president who has literally been implicated in the death of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. The idea that we are putting trade and profit and military spending ahead of human rights, ahead of the protection of our climate and of people in this world makes me so sad.
Just want to redirect you to your own vision of the armed forces.
So for me, we should be investing in the armed forces insofar as that is salaries for the folks that are in service. Those are in fact workers, and we are the Workers' Party. But we also need to be investing to make sure they have housing, that they can do the job we're asking them to do. We increasingly ask them to show up for climate emergencies. We increasingly ask them to show up to deal with, during COVID-19, when we ask them to go into long-term care homes, our Arctic sovereignty, protecting our interests in Canada in the north. These are things that we need to provide those services for, but 5% that's not reasonable in any way, not when we don't have healthcare.
Thank you very much to all of you. On that question, there are two more ping pong rounds to go. And I am going to select now that the next person we will go to is Tony. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Desmond.
Your time will begin after I ask you the first question. And it is on, pardon me one moment. Your first question is on electoral representation. In June of 2025, at the beginning of your campaign, you called explicitly for a merger of the NDP with the Green Party of Canada into a new group that you were calling the Green Democratic Progressives. But you have since said, and I heard you say tonight, that you only want strategic collaboration with the Greens and other parties when it's useful. What changed your mind about the idea of a merger?
Well, it was a play on words. The acronym for the Green Democratic Party is the GDP, which economists love. And so I thought that would be a great thing, the GDP. It was a joke, Desmond. I have to be careful when I play with words, particularly with my friend Scott Miller from the local television station.
Yeah, they had you on the news.
Yeah, I know. We had a 30-minute conversation, and that was just my joke line in it that got the big story. You don't control the news. But no, we don't have time. We are in a crisis situation. And I've worked in a lot of different organizations like Farmers for Climate Solutions, which started off as a relatively small group of farm organizations across the country saying farmers could do more to help solve the climate crisis. And then now it's a coalition of 27 farm organizations across Canada that has grown and doing incredible work. And if people are interested in regenerative agriculture, they should look at that. But coalitions can figure out how they can work together much more easily than they can form new organizations. And so, that initial one was a joke, but no, yes, we've got to form look to collaboration, look to working with other groups across our society that are concerned about creating a just society and a livable future.
Okay,
And
but
so that's what I'm
do you
talking about.
think the Greens and perhaps in some cases the Bloc Québécois have they demonstrated any interest that they want to do this as well? Is it in their interest as well as yours?
If we want to help build a society that works for the people we say we want to represent, then yes, it is. Because the current system is not working for the majority of Canadians if we're talking about a livable, regenerative future of our environment, and if we're talking about an equitable economy that works for most of the people in it. So yes, it's in the interest of the people they want to represent. And I haven't had conversations with the
Okay.
Bloc, but I have had conversation with some of the Green politicians that I know, and there is certainly some interest in figuring out how we get past the roadblock or logjam.
Got to move us
past the
along.
post.
Okay. Second question is about taxation. Your platform calls for closing tax loopholes that elites use to avoid paying what they owe. That was a quote from your platform. I think we've all heard this refrain before, Tony, but usually not with a lot of detail. Can you give an example of a loophole that's just waiting to be closed and how much money doing so could save?
I'm not a tax expert. I know that there are a lot of things I don't know, Desmond, and that's why you contact and work with other people. But there are tax loopholes that allow our companies and our wealthy people to claim they're paying their taxes when they pay much lower percentage in these tax havens. And so they're avoiding paying those taxes now. And the more you can avoid paying tax on money now, it gives you more money to accumulate and increase. So that's one. But the other aspect that I think is critical is to recognize that our tax system and our whole economic system has been designed to concentrate wealth over generations. And when I first got involved in 1980, the liberals and conservatives were helping use high interest rates to transfer money from workers and homeowners and small businesses and farmers to the banks and the already wealthy. And that system has continued. So we need also a much more progressive income tax to tax higher earners harder, and also a progressive wealth tax that starts to reverse that distribution up so it becomes a redistribution out into the community and gives us the money to do the services like healthcare and housing and build the things that people need in our communities and economy.
That's your time. Thank you very much for that repartee with me, Tony. We have one more general question for everybody before we go to the final ping pong and then a little bit of a closing. The final question that all of you are going to answer today has to do with Indigenous rights and reconciliation. We all understand that governance is about priorities. What do you believe the NDP's top priority should be to promote reconciliation and Indigenous sovereignty? Rob Ashton's first on this one.
Thanks, Desmond. So I think there's more than just one. Like right now, I'm up here in Yellowknife, and what I'm learning up here is that many folks they have to travel to go to the doctors because there's no medical facilities where they live. And when they come to Yellowknife, there's not very many hotels here. And so they have to stay, from what I've been told, in sea cans down by the airports. Elders have to come from out of town and learn from and hear about complex medical diagnoses that and English might be not their first language. And that's not reconciliation. Indigenous communities are still fighting to get clean drinking water across this country. How many decades has it been? Fighting for adequate housing, equitable healthcare, and education. Still fighting to have their rights respected on their own lands. This isn't reconciliation. This is absolute pure neglect. So what does reconciliation start with? It starts with fully implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Committee's calls to action and calls for justice for the national inquiry into missing and murdered and Indigenous women and girls. It's about honoring treaties and upholding Indigenous right, which includes free, prior, and informed consent. This all has to be the center in any new projects that get built. We have to close infrastructure gaps like housing, water, schools, healthcare. Because if this government can find billions of dollars to give in corporate subsidies, we can find the resources to ensure Indigenous communities have the same standard of living as everybody else. You know, I come from the labor movement. I think everybody knows that now. And solidarity is a key aspect of it. And what does solidarity mean? When we look away, when the injustices continue, we have to fix this. And it's work we're prepared to take on as a party.
That's time.
Thank you.
Avi, you're next.
Well, there isn't one overarching priority, but there is one piece of legislation that Heather and the other group of the Magnificent Seven in Parliament that have already been fighting, and that's the fast tracking law, the C5 that allows the government to declare a project in the national interest and sweep aside consultations, sweep aside environmental protections and Indigenous rights. And we can't stop fighting that. This is, I mean, it's worse than that, as Heather pointed out earlier, that an individual minister can suspend all laws, any law for any project. And the Conservatives were like, no, that's not enough to suspend, one law on one project. It has to be for the entire sector. That was their contribution to the amendments. So we really need the NDP in fighting form to restore Indigenous rights under Section 35 of the Constitution. The C5 may very well be anti-constitutional. So we've got that fight ahead of us. Tennille speaks eloquently about the infrastructure gap and the enormous economic opportunity in addressing it. The federal government spends billions of dollars every single year fighting Indigenous kids and communities in court, defying court judgments or paying court judgments that have over cases that have been delayed and delayed and delayed. Free, prior, and informed consent is the missing piece, and it means free from coercion. And the consent is knowing what you're signing up to, and the information has to be available, and the consent has to be available before the project even starts. And our whole tendency in this country right now with these projects of national interest is to say yes to the project and then do everything after. We're trampling on FPIC, and that is the biggest thing that we can do to restore balance in Indigenous rights in Canada. Reverse that.
Thank you so much. Heather, you're next.
Thank you. I mean, listen, we have the roadmap for this. We already know what the steps are that we need to take. We have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, those calls to action. We have the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit calls for justice. We have the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We have the roadmap. We know what reconciliation looks like. But more importantly, I think that we also need to recognize too that it's not for me to say what the priorities are for reconciliation or the priorities for Indigenous communities. That is for Indigenous communities. That is for the people who have the right to determine their own futures. The right to free, prior, and informed consent. The right to live in communities that have the exact same supports and benefits and capacity or to thrive as we see in other communities in this country. We see it time and time again. Indigenous communities don't have access to drinking water, don't have access to adequate housing, don't have access to the nutrition required. And the government says it's complicated. It would never be complicated if it was downtown Toronto. It would never be complicated if it was Vancouver Island. So as a country, we need to start treating reconciliation as an actual obligation, as a thing that needs to happen, not as a slogan, not as not as something that we do on the side of our desk. Like this needs to be important. This needs to be something that we commit to, and we have all the tools to do it. We have all the tools, we have all the resources. The only thing lacking is the political will. And until there are more New Democrats in the House of Commons, until we have more people in the House of Commons pushing this government, they're not going to make those changes.
Thank you. Tony, you're next.
Okay. Well, certainly repealing Bill C5, insisting on free, prior, and informed consent are all essential. Using the recommendations of the Reconciliation Commission are all important. And certainly I'm very proud of the role that Quakers played in pushing forward on the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights. But I also recognized many years ago that waiting for the governments that we currently had to act honorably was not happening nearly as quick as I thought it could. And so we worked to start the Canadian Friends Service Committee's Reconciliation Fund. And I don't know if it's the right amount, but on July 1st, Canada Day, I look at my income tax form and I garnish 2% of it and send it off to that reconciliation fund, which gets used to help work on projects that are important to Indigenous communities in terms of their heritage and their culture. But what we have to be recognizing is that we have to work with the people on the ground in those communities, not only to implement the recommendations of the Reconciliation Commission, but to deal with their infrastructure needs in ways that are appropriate and make sense to them. And they have the expertise, and we need to make the resources and the funding available to do what they see as necessary and valuable and needed in their communities. And Tennille can talk to this in much greater depth than I can, but we need to make it real on the ground. And that means using money that would otherwise go to military or other places. We need to prioritize that in terms of government spending, because the lack of adequate infrastructure and drinking water has gone on just way, way too long.
Thank you. Over to you, Tennille.
Yeah, as you can imagine, big topic for me. To toss it out there, the Assembly of First Nations actually writes up a document called Federal Election Priorities. They do it every election, and so it does offer a guidebook onto what they're saying that the priorities are of the nations in Canada. That's not to displace the government-to-government relationships we need with the over 600 nations across this country. I believe we actually need to show up in those communities and say, where are you at? What are your major projects? And where do you want us to show up in partnership in those projects? Absolutely. One thing that we should be doing and championing, just because it's the right thing to do and no other reason, is ensuring that every community across this country has a ballot box in their community. Both provincially and federally, we did that work in my riding last election. We had ballot box show up in Indigenous communities that have never had a ballot box in their community before, and the voter turnout was amazing. It was absolutely amazing to see folks be able to vote in their own community in spaces that they identified as safe. And that's work that we absolutely should be doing because it's the right thing to do. Support Indigenous people across the country to vote, and not just in geographically accessible places, but in places that they actually view as safe from their perspective. Every community center in an urban center or a suburb or a rural community isn't necessarily the safest spot for all people to show up and vote. And we need to be aware of that. And that goes across numerous groups across Canada. We need to make sure that people can actually get to these ballot boxes and place their vote. Infrastructure gap was offered. Yeah, I mean, we're talking over 2 million jobs by closing that gap. We're talking over $650 billion in GDP over the next decade with filling that gap. And all that does is literally just give people a good road, a good house, and clean drinking water. And it's going to contribute massively to our economy.
That's time. Thank you so much, Tennille. We're about 10 minutes behind where we ought to be. That is my responsibility. We're going to move on to our final ping pong session. Who could it be? Of course, the only name left in the bowl is Avi Lewis. Welcome.
No suspense there, Desmond. Thank you.
None at all. Thank you. Your time starts when I finish reading your first question. Bear with me.
The suspense, Desmond, the suspense.
It's way worse for me than it is for you, I
I know.
assure you. Um,
Command F.
Never ever print double-sided pages for a debate. That's what I've been learning. First question's on electoral reform, Avi. You've said that the next time the NDP has the balance of power in a minority parliament, there's one demand, and it's for electoral reform. Under the current first-past-the-post system, however, the Liberal government has governed 69 out of the 100 years in the 20th century. And in this century, the Liberals have governed 15 out of the first 25 years. Why on earth would they ever negotiate away this structural advantage?
Well, I don't rule out the idea that we could get it from the Conservatives too. But the point is not just that we would appeal to the Liberals to do the right thing or that we would try to explain that it's to their advantage. It's not. The reason that I put down that marker is that we need to let people know that this is what we're fighting for. I think this is a super majority of Canadians support proportional representation because people are they're starting to treat their own vote with a sense of shame, with a sense of like dirtiness, like there's nothing, their own relationship to democracy is being polluted by this idea that they have to vote to stop the worst thing from happening. The fact that we have a phrase that we hold our nose and vote in Canada is shameful. And people know that it's anti-democratic. Sure, it's not in the Liberals' interest, but we can build momentum in an election campaign by running on this issue as well as others, and by saying in advance that this is what we will demand if we get into a position where we have the balance of power, because Desmond, we can't be bluffing. We have to be ready to plunge the country back into an election.
You say that people want this, you think, in a majority capacity, but you've also said you don't want a referendum on this. You just want to get it done.
Correct.
Well, why not? I mean, that means that political elites are basically deciding what the new electoral system should be. You don't think that there needs to be any public buy-in from any kind of a referendum or taking this to the public?
Tremendous respect, Desmond. As you know from the examples in Ontario, in British Columbia, and elsewhere, referendums are very susceptible to big spending from political elites that have no interest in seeing proportional representation go through. And that's why Fair Vote Canada and the electoral reform movement in Canada has rejected the idea that we should have more referendums. Where we've had referendums, they have had a majority support, and the thresholds have been set just a little bit higher than the votes we're able to get to.
Okay.
Proportional representation cannot be sent to referendum. We already know that the majority of Canadians want it. And we already know that there's no such thing as democracy.
Gotta move on. I'm sorry. We're going to go to our second question on the public sector.
Welcome to question period, Desmond.
Your plan to invest heavily in new public companies, including the manufacturer of electric battery, you do plan to invest heavily in new public companies, including the manufacturer of electric battery delivery vans. There was an electric delivery van being built in Ingersoll, Ontario up until last year called the Bright Drop, but General Motors canceled it because of poor sales. Why are you proposing to double down on a vehicle that few companies or individuals are actually buying?
We have a massive federal fleet in Canada of postal delivery and other federal vehicles, which we should be making in Canada as electric vehicles. General Motors abandoned that plant and those workers because they're abandoning the electric vehicle market because Donald Trump is going hard back to fossil fuels. Yes. And this is a perfect example of where the market is not, that cannot be what determines whether or not we get off fossil fuels. We need the government to step up and lead. And that plant is a perfect example where there is a need, there is a social and public need for electric delivery vehicles. The government had already poured hundreds of millions into that plant.
But you need a market. You need a market to sell the vehicles, don't you? And the United States is pulling back on EV credits as well. Trump is not interested.
If your only idea of the market is the existing market in the United States, then we have a problem. We have a need for electric vehicles, including delivery vans. Just the federal fleet alone is years and years and years of made in Canada production with unionized jobs, Canadian steel, and serving an urgent need to slash emissions in one of the highest producing emission sectors in the entire economy.
That's time. Thank you so
Oh,
much,
come on, let's
Avi.
argue more.
Yeah,
Come
we could
on.
we could all do it, I'm sure, but I'm already over time. So respectfully to the wonderful people who organized this debate, I'm going to move us on to the final question for all of you. You're all going to get a chance to answer this last kind of closer, but instead of giving you a closing statement straight up, we decided to give you each 45 seconds. I have a friend who is not at all interested in these debates, who's not at all interested in politics, and you're standing next to him waiting for the bus, and you've got 45 seconds to explain to my friend why your platform, it gives them a reason to get involved in this race and broadly in politics. I'm going to start with Heather McPherson for this final question.
Here's what I would say to your friend. Listen, even if you're not a New Democrat, having a strong New Democratic Party in this country means that there are things that are delivered for Canadians. We get things done when we are in the House of Commons. We get things like dental care. We get things like a pharmacare program, workers' rights, protections for people, standing up for human rights. That's what New Democrats get done when we elect more New Democrats. My whole campaign is about building back our party, about building a bigger table, about welcoming people in. People are struggling across the country right now. People cannot afford to eat. They cannot afford their rent. And we need a strong New Democratic Party. I have won 3 times in my riding. I have organized regionally. I have worked with representatives across this country. I know how to win.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather. We'll move along for this final one to Tony.
Well, I would invite them to visit our website, TonyMcQuail-greenprogressive.ca, and look at our holistic goal for Canada, which is a vision that talks about the quality of life that we want to share. And I would talk to them about our 4 R's, the R of representation, so we actually get a working democracy, the R of regeneration, so that we start healing the damage that we've done to Mother Earth, the R of redistribution, which means that we're starting to build an economy that is fair and equitable, and redesign, that we're needing to, if we're going to stay on this planet, we need to start using less energy and fewer resources while having more time and more fun. And that's the kind of society that I want us to build together.
Thank you very much. Tennille, over to you.
Well, I tell them if they're not going to vote for themselves, vote for me. Vote for someone who wants to make sure that there's equity across this country. I would offer to them that we have numerous nations in Canada that are living in third world conditions, that liberals and conservatives are never going to do anything about it. I would offer them hopefully some really funny memes that's going to get into their brain about why it's important to vote in our country. I would talk to them about what's most important to them. Where are their big gaps? If they're a student, let's talk about free post-secondary education and make sure we're lifting that burden of debt off of their shoulders so they can just do what they want to do in post-secondary, graduate and get out into our economy and live a thriving life. So many reasons to get out and vote in Canada.
That's your time. Thank you very much. We've got Rob next.
Here we go. Get involved with politics and vote for the NDP, because we are the party that creates bold solutions that impact the daily lives of Canadian people. We're going to cut taxes for the working class that make $40,000 or less. No more taxes. We're going to tax the rich and their wealth creators. We're going to rebuild our industries for Canadian workers with Canadian materials. We're going to reinvest in our companies, in corporations in this country, with monies that are attached to job creations. Going to build homes. We're going to dual mandate the banks, the Bank of Canada, to deal with inflation as well as job creation. And we're going to take our power back. We're going to bring back the NDP to its roots, and we're going to show people that they can trust the NDP again.
Thank you so much. Finally, Avi.
Well, free transit and functional transit would fix this waiting for the bus problem. Look, Canada's at a fork in the road. We need a straight-talking NDP with a clear alternative to war, genocide, fossil fuels, inequality. We need an offer that can never be confused with either the Liberals or the Conservatives. That means fighting for an independent foreign policy from the US and an independent economy from the US. Liberals and Tories are aiming a fire hose of public money into the coffers of corporations, and we want to redirect it to put out the fires in daily life, the everyday emergency of just getting by in a rigged economy and the emergency of climate breakdown. Market's not going to fix it. The market broke it. That's why we need public options for groceries, cell phone, housing, and more. And it's why we need
That's
a Canadian
time.
Green New Deal to slash emissions and the cost of living at the same time. My timer disappeared.
It disappeared for all of us. Thank you
Okay.
you did a great
Thanks,
job
everybody.
anyway. All of
Woo!
you did a really good job keeping the time. I think that even if we have free transit in the future, we're still going to have to wait for the bus. I'm so grateful to all of you. Thank you to our audience. Thank you to the unbelievable team at Leave Now who have organized all of this. The work that goes on behind the scenes is tremendous. I did not do this alone. I did this with so much support. And I want to say to the candidates, I'm sorry that we couldn't be together in person, but I hope to greet each of you at the upcoming convention later this month in March. I'll turn it back over to Shanaz to close. Thank you so much.
Whew. That was a debate. I hope that you all enjoyed your participation, to all the candidates. I want to thank all of the folks that tuned in tonight. We had 1,100 people across Zoom and YouTube tonight watching this debate. The recording will be available to registrants in an email that we sent out tomorrow. For the candidates, a lot of gratitude in stepping up. It's not easy stepping into the fishbowl of a leadership race in today's often polarized political climate. I thank you each for your leadership, and best of luck to each of you in the upcoming election. Desmond, whew, thank you for all the hard work of moderation and the behind the scenes work on the question and the debate structure design. In case you want to know who came up with the ping pong rounds, that was Desmond Cole, wanting to bring a lot of energy and dynamism and to be able to challenge you on things that you've said, related to your platform. So just lots of appreciation for you, Desmond.
Way harder in person than it is on TV watching.
Yeah, for sure. I expect to see you on moderating future leadership debates in our country. Want to thank the Lead Now and the 350.org team who've been working behind the scenes to help inform the questions and doing all the tech support. Kate Hodgkins, who was our timekeeper throughout this debate. Want to also thank our friends from the CJ PME who really helped us understand how we could actually pull this off. If you'd like to stay involved with Lead Now next week, we're holding 2 organizing calls to launch our Homes Not Pipeline campaign, laying out our plans this spring to pressure the government to choose us, the people, over fossil fuel billionaires. Chris is going to share that link in the chat. And then lastly, Lead Now is majority funded by small donations from our community, and that enables us to hold events like this to support democratic engagement and participation. If you'd like to make a small donation to cover costs of this event today, Chris has also got it in the chat already. Much gratitude and appreciation. Regardless of what happens in the election, I know that each of the candidates are going to stay very focused on making the NDP party, a stronger voice for progressives across the country. So thank you all. And